shampoo balls. Hey there, wonderful people. I wanted to make a little video today about my experience with ableism. Well, not just my experience, just ableism in general and my feelings about the amount of ableism in our society. Ableism is discrimination against disabled people, discrimination and prejudice. Unfortunately, as a society, we do have a lot of ableism. I mean, I have seen whenever there is a news post about a disabled individual, there is pretty much always a guarantee of ableism in the comments, always someone saying something that's rude or discriminatory. And the problem is a lot of these people probably don't even realise they're doing it, or they do realise and they just don't care. And it's not just online, we do face discrimination in person as well. Disability discrimination, I would say, is like a hidden crime in schools, because there are schools that are incredibly discriminatory towards disabled students, even if they don't realise it. By not providing a student with reasonable accommodations, they are being discriminatory. And by sending people out of class for ticking, that is discrimination, because they're sending a student out for a symptom of their disability that they have no control over. In our society, we do need to do better. And, you know, TikTok comments and YouTube comments, unfortunately, are filled with ableism quite a lot as well. There are so many disabled content creators. When people see a disabled person online, some people's first reaction is to just comment something hateful, and I've never understood that. And it can be incredibly disheartening when you're a disabled person and you're just trying to raise awareness and help others, and there are people, you know, in the comment section saying really horrible things, or just flat out not listening and saying you're wrong, even though they're not disabled themselves, so, you know, how would they know? I had an experience with this where I was talking about how autistic people have things like anxiety and depression quite commonly, and how sadly the suicide rate in the autism community is quite high. But someone just said to me, no, autistic people are happy all the time. And I was like, well, actually, no, we're not. I know this because I am autistic. And they just completely refused to believe me. They refused to listen. I'm so surprised. I'm like, you're not even autistic yourself. How would you know? Like, what? It is very frustrating when people who don't experience something think they know better than someone who's lived it their whole life. It's very strange. Sometimes even when we're just going about in public, strangers may make nasty comments towards us. Like, when I was younger, I had some man yell at me, do you realise how stupid you were making yourself look? Because I was ticking, and I was just there like, what on earth? Why do you think that's appropriate? And I know I seem all smiley now, like it doesn't affect me, but the truth is it does. When you feel like you're gonna go outside, do your daily business, you know, go to the shop, stuff like that, and you're just worrying about if someone's gonna say something nasty to you for something you can't control, that is not a good thing at all. The amount of discrimination in our society has had a massive impact on me. You know, whenever I see a hate comment online, I get this surge of adrenaline in anger, you know, not an excited form of adrenaline, anger, because, you know, I get so upset that as a society, people actually think it's okay to treat people that way. And woohoo, it amazes me that there are so many comments online that are so derogatory, so dismissive, so cruel, not just to disabled people, to anyone, but sadly it happens a lot to the disabled community. I'm just amazed how people think that's okay. And, you know, as I said, it causes a lot of anger within me, which raises my blood pressure, and I already have high blood pressure, so that is not a good thing. It makes that worse. So it's definitely not healthy at all. But I've realised that unfortunately some people just don't listen. You know, some ableist people who say these sorts of things, they won't listen. They won't admit they're wrong, and they won't learn from people who have actually had experience with these things. So unfortunately, I think sometimes it's more of a case to protect ourselves and look after our own mental health, to know that we don't have to listen to these people, rather than to try and convince these people they're wrong, because, you know, they are wrong. You know, you should never be so cruel to someone, that is wrong. But some people just don't listen, and I've learnt that the hard way. Sometimes as advocates, we do our best to try and promote understanding and acceptance and inclusion, and that's great. But sadly, there are some people who just can't be convinced. There are some people who can't be convinced to treat disabled people with respect, which is ridiculous, but that's how some people are. So I think in those cases, we don't have to waste our energy trying to convince people, because that's just going to harm us, and they probably find it funny, to be honest, that we are trying to convince them of something, we're trying to help them understand. They probably just find it funny. So I say that the most important thing is just looking after ourselves, hitting that block button where necessary and telling ourselves that we don't need to let them control how we feel. It's easier said than done for sure, but what I mean is, reminding ourselves that the people in our personal lives can be more understanding. Our friends in the disability community are more understanding. So there are still understanding and compassionate people out there, and we kind of have to remind ourselves of that when we can. And it is kind of sad that we more so have to deal with the effects that discrimination and ableism has on us rather than stopping it completely. But someone actually said to me that within our lifetime, we're never going to get everyone to be accepting. And in the past, I would have said that's ridiculous, we can do it. But in reality, there are some people who don't listen, and those people who don't listen are the barriers, because some people they're stuck in their own little bubble, their own ego. They don't want to admit that they said something wrong. They don't want to admit that they did something wrong, or they just don't care. They think that their hateful ways are justified when they're not, but, people can be like that. I've grown up being used to being treated like less of a person because I'm disabled, and I'm laughing, but that's actually a terrible thing. As a kid, I was bullied. I had stones thrown at my house. I had sandwiches thrown at me in the school canteen area. I had people saying that if they were like me, they'd kill themselves. I had people saying they would get a restraining order against me because I'm disabled. I had people say, "Oh, look, she's coming near me," whenever I went near them. I had people say that their mum works for the council and can get me banned from the park where I am now. People can be very, very cruel, and that, thankfully, it didn't impact my self-esteem as much because I was a confident kid in some ways, and thankfully I knew that if people are saying those things, it's a reflection of them and not me, and I honestly just felt sorry for them, that they got joy out of treating other people in a terrible way. But it does still impact my worldview. I do in some ways see the world as kind of a dark place, because there are a lot of hateful people out there, and obviously, as I'm saying, not everyone is. That's why I remind myself, there's good people in my life. My boyfriend is understanding, my friends are understanding. I have the Tourette's community around me who are understanding. I have my parents who are understanding. But that doesn't mean that the ableism we face doesn't have an impact on us, because I would say it did impact my worldview. Hey! And the main issue I face with social media is coming across those hateful comments. Not so much on my videos. I used to get more. I mean, it's not that I don't get any, but I get less now, thankfully. But I do see it on other content creators' videos, especially on TikTok, where people can, share comments and respond to them. And it's kind of depressing when you're scrolling through TikTok and everyone seems to be replying to some sort of hateful comment. And it's great that these people are responding to these comments and educating these people, but it's just sad to see how often these comments actually occur. And I know people will say, "Oh, you're so sensitive, stop being so sensitive. I've been told before that I'm so sensitive." But why wouldn't it have an impact on us if we're constantly treated like less of a person for something that we can't control? Bitch! Ableism is obviously not our fault. We can't help being disabled, and other people can usually control how they react to our disability. But there's just some people who unfortunately think it's funny to treat us in a terrible way for something we can't control. But in all fairness, I would much rather be disabled than be one of those people who find joy in picking on disabled people or saying hateful things, because to me that's the worst possible thing. That's worse than my disability. And that's why I say I feel sorry for these people, because if they have nothing better to do with their time than comment hateful things or say hateful things to people in person, and they just aren't willing to learn anything, then I just feel bad for them, for their closed-mindedness, for their lack of education, for the fact that they find joy in hurting others rather than creating a positive difference. And my mental health was affected very badly by stuff that I faced in my later teenage years, because of the amount of ableism online and stuff. It made me feel like this world just isn't made for me. I can never live up to the standards that society puts on people, and that's not me giving up, and it's not anything disempowering. It's just the truth. I have multiple disabilities, and there are just some things that I physically can't do, and that's not my fault, and I shouldn't be made to feel bad for not being able to do things. But because there's so much lack of understanding, some people will just be hateful, and I need to tell myself that I don't need to let it get to me. I don't need to feel bad about not living up to certain standards, because it's not my fault that I can't. And in all honesty, these societal standards aren't things that everyone wants to do anyway, and the things I'm talking about are like going to university. I got the grades to get into university, but I didn't go because I'm not well enough. Having kids, I don't think I could have my own biological kids, therefore, some people will say, oh, but you're supposed to, blah 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 blah. Not everyone wants to and not everyone can. Bitch. And there's just so much lack of understanding. People are very closed-minded sometimes, and some people will just take things at face value. For example, there are a lot of complexities to disability that some people will not try to understand. They will just take it by what they see on the outside. And ambulatory wheelchair use, sometimes we need to use a wheelchair, sometimes we don't. That's very misunderstood, because people want things to be simple. They want it to be, you're in a wheelchair and just can't walk, or you're not in a wheelchair at all, but that is not the reality. The reality is we can have fluctuating disabilities. People want things to be simple in the sense that they want a simple solution to everything. Some people have the attitude of, well, if a child is yelling and screaming and lashing out, just punish them, that's problem solved. But it's not that simple, because if these so-called behaviours come from a disability or a condition like autism, pandas, Tourette's, etc., they need completely different management, and you can't discipline out something that is a symptom of a disability and that's uncontrollable. These people will need a different management strategy, a different support system in place. And yes, that's very complex, but that's what's needed, because if you punish someone for something they can't control, not only is it not going to solve the problem, it's going to give them terrible self-esteem issues. And this sounds kind of sad, I fantasize quite a lot about being on a different planet, just a completely different universe, where people aren't as hateful and where people don't put as much pressure on you to act typically. If only that place existed, because this universe, the whole universe I'd say, but this world right now is pretty terrible in the sense that there are a lot of ableist people, but again, I have to remind myself that not everyone is like that. And I remember a few months ago, actually, when I faced discrimination in public for my Tourette's, I remember thinking someone should create a map of places and venues that are more Tourette's inclusive, where the staff aren't going to say bad things about you or ask you to leave because of your disability. But I thought that's even sad that I would think that that's necessary, because we shouldn't live in such a discriminatory world. Another way in which disability is complex but people want it to be simple is with autism. People think that if you don't look autistic, then you're not autistic, but that's not the truth, because there are many invisible autistic traits, and those still have a massive impact on people. And yet some people will say, well, why do people become so obsessed with labelling every quirk as a disability? That's not the case. It can't be diagnosed as a disability if it doesn't have a negative impact on our lives. Just because you don't see that negative impact doesn't mean it's not there. I unfortunately have a lot of internalized anger related to all of the ableism that I have faced and that I have seen others face. I mean, I see it pretty much every day online, and I have experienced in-person ableism as well, and that unfortunately does lead to the development of internalized anger, which is very valid. I mean, we're really just made to feel like we are hated in this world for something that we can't control, and, same as with other forms of discrimination, it's not okay, and it's just terrible that people think it's appropriate. But bitch. Sadly, I don't think that everyone can be convinced to not be ableist, so I think it's more important to build our own confidence and, tell ourselves that if other people judge, if other people are ableist, then they just don't understand, and they're only showing how judgmental and ignorant they are, really. I would love to have the attitude of, why should we care? But it does affect me a lot right now, but I hope that one day it won't affect me as much, and I can just have that attitude of, I don't care if you're ableist towards me, I'm confident in myself. Yep. As disability advocates, if we constantly make ourselves feel overly responsible for correcting other people's ableism, we end up just absolutely exhausting ourselves. So, we have to raise awareness for the people out there who will listen, but also be aware that sadly there will be some people who won't listen, but we don't have to stress ourselves out about that too much, because we can just try our best to ignore them and help others in the disabled community gain confidence to hopefully ignore those people too.